Bullets, bullet construction, bullet technology, how to select the right bullet. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Kind of important for a gunfighter, right? There's a lot of heavy stuff going on in the world. We may look back and realize we're already in the midst of World War III. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a regional conflict. There's something like 12 countries directly involved. I've been taking in a lot of news. Also, it's talking about like the uptick in terror attacks in the U.S. and on U.S. embassies and things like that around the world. And as you might imagine, with my primary breadwinning job, private security contracting, I have been working extra. I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. I've been talking about that for a while on Patreon. I have something like 2,900 posts on Patreon. Been doing a lot of talk about that kind of stuff. Today with you guys, I kind of want to shake that off and just talk about bullets and bullet tech. With that, welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, bullets, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security contracting, longtime hunter, guide, competition shooter. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, bullets. Projectiles. We may get in a little bit of shotgun, but maybe not. I'm just going to kind of talk on this. Again, I wanted to get away from the politics and the warring and all this stuff and just talk about bullets. I love guns and bullets and ballistics, and I can really nerd out on ballistics. Some of you guys may really like ballistics. Some of you guys may just gloss over. First, one must ask, what do we want the bullet to do? If we look at this philosophically, right? How can you bring philosophy into bullets? Well, very easily. Step back and say, what do I want the bullet to do? Almost certainly, the answer to that is I want the bullet to hit the target. In pretty much every case, right? Unless you're just making noise, unless you're just going full Middle East party style and doing mag dumps up in the air, you probably want your bullet to hit the target. Now, if that is your only criteria, and sometimes it is, your only criteria is I want the bullet to hit the target. Let's say you're shooting steel. I don't really care what the bullet does after it hits the target, unless I'm shooting it at really close distance. We'll get into that later, but I just want to hit the steel. Then really the majority of your concern should be with accuracy and reliability, because to first hit the target, the gun must go off, which means it should feed and cycle well, which gets into bullet profile. So maybe the first thing we should tackle is make sure the bullet profile is one that feeds well in your gun. For something like a revolver, may not matter, but for most other actions, right, the feed profile of the bullet is kind of important, going up the feed ramps, a lever action, a semi-auto, a bolt action. You can have some ammunition that feeds well and some that doesn't. So in order to hit the target, the round has to get into the chamber first and be detonated. So the feed profile is important. You may find this in semi-auto handguns. Not so much today. Most handguns today, I would say most quality ones, not some Turk nasty knockoff. But most modern designs are going to be designed to feed hollow points because that's pretty standard nowadays. But that wasn't always the case. You know, even up into the 90s, that was like the beginning of widespread use of hollow points in handguns. So a lot of older designs may not be designed for hollow point ammunition. The classic 1911s, and I love them, but the older style is the feed ramp is not built into the barrel. They may or may not feed hollow points. They may feed some hollow points and not others. The newer design, I would say the more modern design, is for a feed ramp on the barrel. This tends to do a little bit better with hollow points. So the geometry, even if you take out terminal performance and what it does to the target, the feeding of the round is important. So look at your bullet first, especially if you have a finicky gun. Let's say you're running like a high power, Browning high power, or, a 1911. old GI style, you could probably still use hollow points, but you may have to look at the hollow point and get one with a very forgiving round ogive on the outside of the bullet with a relatively smaller cavity. You may not. It may feed them fine. Next, talking about hitting the target, if you only care about hitting steel at whatever distance, accuracy is probably paramount, especially when you get into rifle bullets. That's why you'll see a lot of these rifle bullets are simple cup and core designs. Some of the most accurate bullets out there, the Burgers, the Hornadies, the ELDs, right? Those really long-range, high BC bullets, they're almost certainly simple lead cup and core design. Because it's simple, it's proven. We've been making bullets like that for a long time. It's a very proven process. It's very simple, and it's very accurate. Those bullets, although they certainly are deadly, are not particularly designed for terminal performance. They're designed to hit a target. If you hit the steel and the bullet disintegrates rather quickly, you don't really care. All you care about is hitting the steel. That's why a lot of those match bullets, although some people hunt with them, they kind of have a bad rap in some circles for not doing well because they weren't designed to. If you take a match bullet designed to hit steel at 1,000 yards and you get mad that it didn't do well on your elk, well, that's probably your fault because nobody told you it was going to. Or at least probably the bullet manufacturer didn't tell you it was going to. Maybe some dude on some forum somewhere told you. But what was it designed to do? What, again, getting back to that philosophy, what is it designed to do? What do you want it to do? If you just want it to hit steel, then paramount accuracy and, depending on the distance, the BC of the bullet is important. If you take it to the handgun, if you're just shooting steel, and say you're at safe distances, generally, and you have to look at the manufacturer, but generally for steel targets, if they're any kind of decent angle, 10 yards is like your minimum safe distance. But assuming you don't go super close and you're using frangible bullets like in a shoot house, which if you're doing that, you probably know what you're doing. But if, let's say you're shooting steel at a safe distance, you don't really care what the bullet does as long as it feeds and it's relatively accurate out of your gun. Or if you're shooting handgun at 10 yards, just a regular cup and core bullet, Winchester white box. Heck, if you're shooting a revolver, just old school lead rounds, probably you don't care because you're just hitting steel. You don't care what happens to the bullet after that. You don't care what it does. So just simple, generally cup and core or your full metal jacket is going to be fine. Because you're not asking that bullet to do a lot on the target. You just need it to get there and make some noise, let you know that you hit the target, and that's pretty much it, right? Now, if we stick with the handgun, if we are using it as a fighting handgun, a defensive handgun, in real life, we likely need it to do more than that on the target. Now, of course, full metal jackets are deadly. People have been using full metal jackets in warfare a long time. But there are better options. And because a handgun is very limited, and I love handgun shooting, I've won more competitions in handgun. And I love handgun. I love it. I love to compete with it, but I like that because it's a challenge. I love to hunt with a handgun. But it's hard. It's a lot harder than with a rifle or a shotgun. Handguns are limiting. That's why I'm saying this. They are limiting in they are harder platform to shoot, they're harder to be effective with, and they're inherently less powerful than shotguns and rifles. Right? I was issued an M9 in the Marine Corps. I carried an M9 in war, but it wasn't my main go-to weapon. If I was fighting with my M9, things went seriously wrong. Nobody arms their mainline infantry with just handguns, right? It's not a thing for a reason. Case in point. So we see this as being really important for the average day-to-day person that's armed, well-regulated, trains in selecting of handgun ammo. Getting to the first philosophy part, needs to hit the target. So you're probably not, unless you're just a baller tactically, right? You're probably not just going out and training with massive amounts of premium hollow point defensive ammunition. So you need to find one that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact as your training ammo. And you either need to get a product that's designed to do that, like, and I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, but like Spear Lawman, like 115 grain, and Spear Lawman 115 grain, or Spear Lawman FMJ, and then the Spear Gold Dot 115 grain, which is made to like match a bullet profile. Again, getting back to feeding, shooting the same point of aim, point of impact, all that stuff. You need to test that on your own. If you like shooting 147 grain, let's say Federal American Eagle, then you should probably find a 147 grain defensive load that shoots same point of aim, point of impact. It's probably going to be a similar grain weight, but similar velocity, right? I'm a big fan of this, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Don't be the guy that trains with 115 grain ball, and then you load up your 135 grain plus P plus mega stoppers, and they don't shoot anywhere near where you're aiming, and you've never tested it. You don't know if they feed in your gun. You don't know if they're going to hit where you're aiming at. So the third point of what they do on the target is kind of irrelevant because you're not going to hit it anyway. So it's really important with the handgun. One, to hit where you're aiming. One, that it feeds in your gun. And then also that it does the right thing when it gets to the target. And again, handguns are inherently less powerful. So it's really important that you pick the right projectile. We have seen a great advancement since, let's say, the 90s in hollow point handgun ammunition. What do you want it to do on the target? It's a balancing act with a handgun because you're limited in power. You want it to expand so it doesn't go all the way through the target and overpenetrate, or barely goes through the target and does the most damage it can, because that's better for everybody. Yeah, probably even the guy getting shot. Oh, how is that possible? Well, you're shooting to stop the threat, right? So he's behaving badly. You're engaging the target to make him stop that bad behavior, whatever that is. And unless some crazy thing happens, you're going to keep shooting until that behavior stops. So if you can shoot him once or twice with a good expanding projectile, that's better than having to shoot him half a dozen times with a full metal jacket. For everybody, for you, for him, for the bystanders. So use the proper ammunition. Getting back to that, you could have a simple cup and core full metal jacket bullet where it's just a hollow cavity in the front. Lead jacket, as long as it's designed properly. Some of your older hollow points are going to be like this. Some of the newer ones might even be like this. And that doesn't mean it's a bad choice. If it was designed and has been used effectively, it has some street cred, it can be a simple, drawn-out bullet. Getting back to what you want to do on the target, you may want a bonded bullet, especially if you want to keep everything together. Shooting through things like sheet metal, like a car door, auto glass, things like this, important to law enforcement officers for obvious reasons. You, if you're just an armed civilian, if you're an armed civilian, you may or may not find this important. You may want to save money and train a little bit more with, even if you find a good paired load, you might want to train a little bit more with your defensive load. It may be more important to you to get more practice in with your defensive load and save a little bit of money. You may decide it's more important to have a good bonded bullet that's likely going to cost more, but that is better for those intermediate barriers. You know, the auto glass, the sheet metal, the drywall, whatever it is. But that's getting back to, what do you want it to do on target? Do you live somewhere hot where most people are in T-shirts? Do you live somewhere where people like a Carhartt jacket and then a hoodie underneath it? And then who knows how many layers underneath that is like standard fare most of the year because you live in a really cold place. You might choose a different hollow point than the person in Florida. So again, what do you want the bullet to do? A good expanding projectile that doesn't overpenetrate, doesn't underpenetrate. Because that's the other thing. You don't want it to expand so fast like you get, some crazy, they always like come out with something like game-changing. That's a red flag. If it's like game-changing and it's some aluminum or super lightweight, crazy high-velocity round with some impressive energy numbers, and then it just, dissipates on impact and you get just like a surface hit, the wound may look nasty, but it very likely won't get into anything incapacitating, at least not in the time frame that's going to help you. So you want to make sure you get enough penetration and not over expansion. So again, it's a balancing act. Especially with a handgun, you got to walk a fine line there. But the ammunition companies, most of the big ones and some of the smaller ones, have done a really good job. They all have lines that do well for this. Make sure it'll feed out of your handgun. Make sure it was designed and works well out of your barrel length. Because if it was designed for a 4 or 5 inch barrel and you're shooting out of your little, hashtag me too, 2-inch barrel that's half the length, that means you lose velocity. It may or may not expand at all out of your gun. So if you're carrying a tiny gun, make sure you get ammo tailored for that. Defensive bullet technology is something you should give some serious thought to. Things like, do you want it bonded? Do you not want it bonded? What are you trying to get the bullet to do? Also things like, do you want a pre-filled nose cavity with some kind of rubber elastomer? Because, some of those things, fabric, drywall, can clog a hollow point so that it acts like a full metal jacket. Obviously not great. The shape of the bullet, is it going to feed in your gun? All those things you should give some serious thought to, because for the average armed American, the thing that you're going to have on you probably when the balloon hits the fan, right, is going to be your handgun, your carry gun. So give some serious consideration to the bullet technology, to the type of bullet that you want. It's probably going to be the gun that you have right away, even if you have to fight your way to your rifle or your shotgun, right? You still have to do that with your handgun, so probably pretty important. Give it some thought other than just marketing hype. This box looks fancy. It has words like smasher and ripper and game changer on it, or all the marketing, or whoever influencers are pushing it on whatever platform. Give it some serious thought to your handgun bullet technology. Now, if you're talking about other specialty cases for handgun hunting is a niche. I realize that, right? Something like 5% of the U.S. population hunts. Probably more of you guys in the audience, but like 5% hunt. And that includes like all hunting. That includes like bird hunters with shotguns, or only small game hunters. And I'm not disparaging those guys, but handgun hunting, or hunting itself, is a small niche. It might not seem like that if you're into it, but you tend to surround yourself with people like you. It's just part of the tribal nature of being human. I don't see that there's much wrong with that, but 5% is small anyway. The percentage of avid handgun hunters is exponentially smaller than that. So this is a small niche, so I'm going to go over it briefly. For that, you may want, a high-tech bullet. You may want, a bonded hollow point bullet, depending on caliber and what you're trying to do in your game. You may want to go super low-tech. A hard cast key-style semi-wad cutter has been a choice for a long time, and it's still a good one. Now, let's continue down this road to rifle projectiles. We talk about simple cup and core construction. It's kind of the standard. In rifle, since you have so much power, you might go to the other extreme and want more rapid expansion. These are varmint bullets. Varmint bullets to the extreme can be like frangible sintered metal bullets, something like a varmint grenade, which can be devastating on really small game with a fairly powerful rifle. I've hunted with these, things like prairie dogs, ground squirrels. They're phenomenally effective because you have a very powerful weapon with a very small target. So you want very rapid expansion, but that's what it's for, a very small target. And there are less radical varmint-type bullets. Something like a Hornady VMAX has been a standard for a long time. Rapid expansion. But that's where it is. VMAX, they're designed for varmints, for small game with a powerful rifle. You want more rapid expansion. You may, to be fair, get some pretty devastating results on medium-sized game or for defensive use, assuming you don't have to punch through a lot of bone, assuming the game is very thin-skinned, or assuming the adversary does not have any kind of thick outer layer. But that's not an assumption. I don't know that I would advise that unless you really know what you're doing in specific circumstances. But the varmint bullets, they're designed for more rapid expansion. Also, I should mention, A lot of cup and core bullets, if it's a match bullet, they can be hollow point. But this is not the same kind of hollow point that you're thinking of for a handgun. Handgun hollow points, unless you're just cheap and meant to trick you into thinking it's a good expanding hollow point, a lot of rifle hollow points are not meant for expansion. They're just simply a byproduct of the bullet making process. Something like an OTM match bullet, that open tip is just there because it's a byproduct of the machining process, the making of the bullet. So it may be very accurate, it may be a very good bullet, but don't assume that the hollow point in a rifle bullet is actually going to make it expand or be good terminally. It may or may not. You have to do your own research on that. Don't just assume, it's a hollow point, so therefore it's good for X, Y, or Z. Was it actually designed for controlled expansion? Now, with a rifle bullet, we do have bonded bullets. We have mechanically bonded bullets. We have chemically bonded bullets. Something, because you're dealing with a higher velocity, something where you want the core and the jacket to stay together. Now, you may or may not care about this. Let's look at hunting. Depending on the caliber, right? If you are hunting deer, white-tailed deer with a 30 caliber, 30-06, 308, there's nothing wrong with going to a bonded bullet, but do you really need it? A simple cup and core bullet, something like a high shock or a power shock, or I think the Super X is an unbonded bullet. Something that's meant to expand and have terminal performance, but is not bonded in any way. That may be perfectly fine. If you're going down in caliber, you may want to look at a bonding, or if you're hunting bigger game. Or you may just decide you want good, solid stick-to-itiveness, stick-togetherness, integrity of the bullet is probably the better term. When passing through something, you may decide you want a bonded bullet. Again, chemically bonded, mechanically bonded, some way that the bullet stays mostly together. Something like a core lock, an inner bond, a nozzler partition. These are all examples of this, designed to, at least in part, keep the bullet in a larger mass without completely coming apart, to keep some of that bullet integrity and likely drive deeper into the animal. Or in defensive use, to stay together and go through things like, again, with a rifle, auto glass, things like that. You may decide if it's a truck gun or something like that, you want a bonded bullet for just such an occasion. Now, full metal jackets, I'm not going to say they're not deadly. Of course they're deadly. A lot of people have been killed with full metal jackets, but that's because of the Hague Convention, and that's generally stipulated by warfare, by the laws of war. Unless that applies to you, probably don't make it apply to you unless you have a good reason for it. There are better options. And I think it's attributed to one of the Soviet leaders in World War II or the Cold War, I forget who, but quantity has a quality all its own. The simple cup and core bullets and or full metal jacket bullets, those are going to be, in general, unless you find a screaming deal somewhere, they're going to be your most affordable. So they're going to be the best for practice. And obviously in warfare, if you're trying to make millions of rounds of ammunition, and you're fighting in squads or using machine guns, each individual bullet becomes less important than the ability to produce massive amounts of ammunition. So just keep that in mind, again, as to whether or not that applies to you. Just because, the military uses full metal jacket 308, does that mean that you should be using full metal jacket 308 in a rifle? Probably not, unless, again, you just want it to be more affordable. Also, with the rifle, you are likely to run into solid copper projectiles. Now, look, I don't lose any sleep over worrying about condors in California, but I do like copper bullets. I like them for their terminal performance. I don't know that I support any state mandating the use of copper bullets, but that doesn't just mean they're for hippies, right? That doesn't just mean that they're bad. They can be very good terminally. They can be very good. And less concerned about condors, more concerned about the health of you and your family. Copper obviously is not toxic, so you don't get a lot of little lead particles inside your meat. Now, I'm not one to care too much about that, but you may. So solid copper is useful for that. And I say solid copper, it's probably some kind of alloy. It probably has some other elements in it. gilding metal, mono metal, but these bullets can be quite effective, especially for hunting. And you may look at them in general anyway because you just want a solid copper bullet, but you may also look at them if you are hunting on a marginal caliber. Like if you were hunting deer with a .223, you probably want to look at a bonded bullet or a solid copper monolithic bullet. I'm not saying it's a great idea, but if you're going to do it, pay some extra special attention to the construction of that bullet. Whereas you might do just fine with a cup and core. In a .308 and a whitetail deer, you may want to look to a bonded or a monolithic if you're going to step down to a .223 for a deer. And again, I'm not saying that's a good idea, but a lot of people do it. So if you're going to do it, at least be judicious with your selection of bullet construction. Also common in rifle bullet construction, you'll see the tips of the bullets, whether it's a polymer tip. I think Nosler has the rights to the name ballistic tip, but a lot of people just call all of it ballistic tip. But it would be a Nosler ballistic tip or some other kind of plastic polymer tip to the bullet. These can give you a little bit better flight through the air ballistic coefficient. Not super important for most people. They can, though, especially in a semi-auto or a gun that tends to jam, talking about feeding, slamming the front of the bullet up on a feed ramp. It can be a lot better for that. So, you're shooting a semi-auto and it's slamming back and forth in the magazine, maybe deforming the front of the bullet. Those kind of plastic polymer tips can mitigate that. That's something to consider. Also, if it's designed well, it can be designed to break off fairly easily and give a good frontal section at the bullet for resistance, causing it to expand at the proper rate, whatever the manufacturer decides that should be. Now, shotgun, I want to get into this a little bit. A lot of people are like, it's a shotgun, who cares, it's lead shot. Well, yeah, if you're hunting with just lead shot, it kind of is what it is. You can also have hardened lead shots, which deforms less, patterns better. Also, much like the condors, the government has decided that you shall not hunt waterfowl with lead shot. You have to use steel shot or a non-toxic shot, steel being the most affordable. Steel is going to go a lot higher velocity in general, but it's also going to be a lot less effective. And in general, you're going to have to move up in shot size, which means you're going to get much less shot per shell, all of the things being equal, with steel shot. So just bear that in mind. There's also things, especially in buckshot, like a buffer between the shot, again, to stop it from deforming. Because the more it deforms, in general, the worse pattern you're going to get. And you'll see things like copper-plated buckshot or even regular shot, nickel-plated shot. You might see a combination of these. You might see nickel-plated buffered buckshot or regular shot. These are all in an effort to stop that deformation. It also may penetrate better if it's a buckshot, because when the round hits whatever it's going to hit, it's going to deform less. You may decide any of this is important or not important to you. As far as slugs go, there are, I know this is kind of sounds counterintuitive, but rifled slugs are meant to be shot through a smoothbore barrel. Non-rifled sabot slugs are meant to be shot through a rifled barrel. There are some exceptions, but in general, that's the rule. Kind of confusing, I know. Sabot it's a way to shoot a sub-caliber or sub-gauge smaller than the actual diameter of the barrel by having some kind of sabot, usually plastic nowadays, in between the bore and the projectile. This really gets rid of the versatility of your shotgun, but some places, some governments have said you can't hunt deer with anything but a shotgun, and so people have specialty-built slug shotguns. But for the average go-to survival shotgun, all-around versatile shotgun, you're going to be shooting a smooth bore, and the two main types of slugs for this are Bernecki and Foster. Both are generally rifled, meant to be shot, again, through a smooth bore barrel. Some technologies in this, you might see some coatings, like a Federal Deep Penetrator will have some kind of copper wash on it. A Bernecki slug will generally be more solid, and it'll have, I don't want to say fletching, but some kind of attachment to the back of it like a badminton birdie to make it fly through the air without spinning so fast and fly true. So often that fletching or backing will be attached to the back of the slug, the heavy part up front, the lighter part in the back to make it fly more true. Now, the rifling on the slugs has a couple of purposes. It is so it can squeeze down and go through chokes without blowing your shotgun up, which is a good thing. But also, there's some debate about this, but I've seen some pretty decent high-speed footage. It shows that the rifling actually does spin the slug, and it doesn't have to go very fast as far as RPMs go to stabilize the slug. So there's some debate about it's not meant for that, it doesn't do that, but there's also some decent evidence that actually the rifling on the slug does spin it enough to stabilize it, so it's more accurate. Instead of the rifling being in the barrel, it's on the slug, and just the wind resistance or whatever going through the rifling on the slug is going to spin it a little bit. I'm not aware, there are some specialty slugs like steel slugs, and those are kind of crazy marketing things, I think. I'm not aware of anywhere that's so draconian that you only can use a shotgun and you only can use slugs and you only can use non-toxic slugs. I mean, what are we even doing at that point? I'm not aware of anywhere that's the rule, but maybe there's somewhere. In general, slugs are going to be lead. You might find some kind of coating on there, again, like a copper wash or something. But Bernanke slugs or Foster slugs, in general, Bernanke slugs are going to penetrate a little bit deeper, but you're dealing with such a massive amount of energy on a shotgun slug at, let's say, inside 150 yards. It doesn't make a lot of difference for hunting most things. A Foster slug for defense, for hunting medium to large game is going to be more than enough energy and performance. A lot of times a Foster slug can expand, but you're dealing with a 76 caliber projectile, so it doesn't really have to expand a lot anyway. So just keep that in mind. Shotgun's kind of different than a rifle. I know with a slug you're shooting a single projectile, so it's kind of like a rifle, but the numbers, the velocity, the weight of the projectile, it's its own thing. So don't think just carte blanche like, I want a hollow point with a rifle, so I want a hollow point with a shotgun. Again, you may find a hollow point in a shotgun projectile, but it's already 76 caliber if it's a 12 gauge ish, 72 caliber, 76 caliber, whatever it is, ish, right? So I forget the exact diameter of a 12 gauge. It's 70 something caliber. It doesn't need to expand, really. So those are some thoughts on ballistics and bullet construction. Also, keep in mind the velocities, right? Projectiles are going to behave far differently at, let's say, 1,000 feet per second, which is typical handgun velocity, versus, 1,600 feet a second, which is typical slug velocity, versus 2,800 over 3,000, sometimes even up over 4,000 feet per second with a rifle. So again, these are kind of different worlds. So pay attention to all of this when you go to select a projectile for whatever the purpose is. But those are some of my thoughts on projectiles, bullet construction, ballistic stuff, mostly on this episode, terminal ballistics, but I hope it was useful. If you are more interested on a specific aspect like defensive handgun bullets or ballistics, you can likely use a search engine in the podcast and find that there's other content on just that one specific thing. Or hunting bullets, you get the idea. So this was not meant to be a really in-depth. It was more meant to be a flyover 30,000-foot view of the subject. I feel like this was a lot of technical and tips type stuff, so I'm not going to give a tactical tip of the day because a lot of this was like ammo selection tips and tricks and whatever you want to call it. But of course, the tactical verse of the day is the most important part of the show. A lot of this we talked about hunting, right? One of my favorite Psalms, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows us his handiwork. That's the beginning of Psalm 19. Some other good parts of Psalm 19. Cleanse me from secret faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sin. Let them not have dominion over me. Psalm 19 is not very long. I encourage you to go read it in toto for yourself. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do, and have a blessed day.